Welcome back, this is LoCA, and today I want to introduce you to one of the most interesting full-frame 50mm f1.8 you can purchase in 2026. That lens is the Yongnuo 50mm f1.8 DF Lite, and this lens gets sold at $135 MSRP, which is already impressive for a full-frame autofocus lens, but it's going to be more impressive once we start talking about the performance and the overall results that you can get with this lens, because this lens punches way above its weight class. Before going any further in this review, my usual disclaimer: Yongnuo sent me this lens to test and review, and I get to keep it, but I'm not getting paid, and they have no saying on what this video is going to show you or what this video is going to tell you. Back to the lens and back to the build quality of the lens. For a lens that costs $135, you can't complain about the build quality of this lens. Yes, of course, it's a plasticky build, but it doesn't feel cheap in the hands. It's relatively good plastic. It doesn't feel hollow, which usually is that feeling that feels creepy. It feels like it's built with a decent level of craftsmanship, and it gets you a lot of feature for a lens in this price range, because of course you get the pedal hood that you see in my hands over here. It's pretty big, while the lens is not that big, and you get your usual manual focus ring, which seems smooth. I haven't used manual focus, so I won't talk to you about manual focus in this video. And speaking of focus, you have a autofocus manual focus switch. You have that on the side. Weirdly enough, they didn't label the autofocus manual focus switch with your usual AF, MF on the two sides of the switch. They labeled it with a 1 and a 2. Just be aware that 1 is autofocus and 2 is manual focus. I don't know why they went that route. It doesn't really matter, but I just wanted you to know. And you also get a function button that usually you can assign through the camera menu. You also get on the side a USB-C port for future firmware upgrades, and the lens mount is made of metal, which, if you compare it to some Nikon lenses like the 40mm f2 or the 28mm f2.8, those are made entirely of plastic. And I'm talking about Nikon because in my case, I have the Nikon Z version in my hands. So in general, when it comes to the build quality, for the price, you can't really complain. It's also a fairly lightweight lens at only 273 grams, so it feels really well in the hands, even with a smallish camera like the ZF, a camera that doesn't have a grip. So it's going to be very easy to use even with small cameras. So again, not a premium build quality, but not a bad build quality either. Where this lens impressed me the most, however, it's in its image quality, because it's a very sharp lens already wide open, and it's sharp up until basically the extreme corners. And as you stop it down to f2.8, basically the lens gets corner-to-corner sharpness that you would not expect at this price point. Of course, the lens shows some vignetting, and that goes away when you get to f2.8. And also, as you stop the lens down, even if you're not improving the sharpness by a huge margin, what happens is that you're improving the contrast, because the lens's contrast when it's wide open, it's not super contrasty, but once you get to f2.8, the contrast is really high, and it's really pleasing to look at. So all in all, from a sharpness standpoint, you can't really complain about this lens. Overall, from an optical performance, you can't really complain. Now, one caveat is I use this lens on the Nikon ZF, and the Nikon ZF, or ZF, because I'm going to call it both ways in this video, has only 24 megapixel. This means that it's one of the lowest resolution sensors you can possibly buy today on a new camera, for full frame, of course. And this means that I probably didn't stress the lens's sharpness to its maximum degree. But also, at this price point, I don't see a lens like this ending up in a high-end professional setup. You don't purchase a lens like this if you're a high-end professional. Not that you can't use it, but if you have the budget to purchase, let's say, a Sony a7R6, because this lens is also available for Sony, you will not purchase a $100 lens. That goes without saying. But besides that, the resolution is going to be more than enough for any enthusiast or professional that just wants to have a 50 millimeters in the bag, like as a break glass in case of emergency type of stuff. This lens is going to be more than enough when it comes to resolution. Back to the optical performance. When it comes to the bokeh, you buy a lens like this also to experiment with bokeh, especially if you're an enthusiast that is approaching its first prime lens. This is a great option because it allows you to play with bokeh. The bokeh with this lens is really good. It can show some nervousness at times depending on the background, but for the most part, I am pleased with the results. And when we talk about resistance to flare, resistance to ghosting, this lens is quite impressive because usually when third-party manufacturers at this price range, where you suffer the most is in backlit situation because the flare sometimes becomes unusable. They wash the image out and everything becomes a huge mess. With this lens, none of that happens. The flare resistance is really good. Yes, you can see flares here and there, but it's not dramatic. And also the contrast gets retained pretty well throughout the aperture range. And even when it comes to chromatic aberration, this lens performs way better than I would have expected. Because yes, you can find some in some extreme conditions, but they're not dramatically bad, and you absolutely need to look for them if you want to find them. It's not something that is going to pop out of the image and it's going to be the first thing that you look at. So something is present, but it's by any means, it's not going to compromise your image. And even when it comes to longitudinal chromatic aberration, LoCA, that effect where as you go from out of focus to in focus to out of focus, what it's out of focus in the background, in the foreground, have different colors. Usually it's green and orange, green and teal, something like that. This lens show a very small degree of that, but again, you have to look for it because it's not going to be visible at the first glance in the image. So it is not going to impact your image at any point. Like it's not going to be a factor. That's at the end of the day, that's what I wanted to get at. So from an optical standpoint, at $135, this lens is just a steal. And it would have been a good performance even if the price was going to be twice as much. It's a good performance regardless of the price. Another area where you usually suffer with third-party manufacturers is the autofocus performance, especially if we're talking low-budget lenses like this one. In this case, I can't really complain. Yes, I missed a couple of shots here and there, but it's not the Nikon ZF, it's perfect. And I have missed shots even with Nikon lenses, so I can't really put it on the lens for the fact that I missed a couple of shots. But in general, the autofocus has turned out being pretty good. Even following subjects, of course, this is not a sports lens. You should not expect to be able to shoot sports with a lens like this. But normal stuff, your pets, people moving around, it's gonna do fine. It's not the fastest in the world, of course, but you should not expect that. Again, at this price point, it would be silly to expect that, but it's fast enough that it's not going to ruin the experience. And even in video, the autofocus performs really, really well. It followed me with no problems, and I would say it's relatively reliable, even for video performance. When it comes to video, however, you need to be aware of the fact that this lens shows a pretty heavy degree of focus breathing, so you need to keep that in mind as you're shooting. However, we're still talking about a $135 lens. This is not meant to shoot professional movies. It's not going to be your next blockbuster movies lens. It's not going to be used in that scenario. But for normal stuff, you shouldn't be worried about that at all. And so in conclusion, this Yongnuo 50mm f1.8 DF Lite comes highly recommended. This is The 50mm that I would recommend if you're looking for a full frame, 50mm f1.8, that it's not gonna break the bank. It's not gonna even break anything. Like, it's so inexpensive that it's the easiest purchase you can possibly make, and you're not leaving anything behind. Yes, the construction is made of plastic, but it's still relatively good. And where it matters the most, the performance. This lens is rock solid. There's nothing that I could point at and say, hey, yes, it's a good lens, but there's no, it's a good lens, but it's a good lens, comma. It stops there. And I would recommend it to anyone who's looking for a inexpensive solution to start using primes, to experiment with primes, or getting their first 50mm because they've been using other lenses in their career. Even professional photographers that want to have a 50mm in their backpack. This one is really, really good. I hope you liked this video. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that you want to know more about this lens. That was it for today. Ciao.